The second glance. The law firm's glass walls gleamed under the cold morning light, their surfaces so polished they reflected the towering skyline with crisp precision. The entire building radiated wealth and control, a place where conversations weren't just words, they were power plays. I wasn't supposed to be here, and yet, here I was. I stepped inside, heels clicking against the pristine marble floors. The air carried the scent of expensive cologne, polished wood, and the kind of coffee that costs more than an average lunch. The people here didn't rush. They moved with purpose, controlled, efficient. Every conversation was hushed, precise, meant only for those who needed to hear it. I adjusted the strap of my bag, my grip tightening around the folder in my hand. The gallery had overreacted. Last night, I had spoken up when I shouldn't have. I had drawn the wrong kind of attention. I had made the mistake of not being invisible. And now I was here, not because of any real sponsorship deal, but because the gallery was afraid. You understand, Sophia. We just need to be certain there won't be any complications. Madame Vestra's voice had been smooth, practiced, but the message had been clear. You caused a scene, you fix it. So they sent me to Alexander Valemont, not because I had the authority to negotiate anything, but because they thought he might listen to me. The elevator doors slid open too soon. Through the frosted glass of his office, I saw him before he saw me. The sharp angles of his posture, the crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the tie loosened just slightly. He was flipping through a document, one hand against his temple, completely focused. He didn't look up when I stepped inside. He made me wait. The silence stretched just long enough to be deliberate before he finally lifted his gaze, dark, calculating, assessing. Then he smirked. They sent you? There was something infuriating about the way he said it. Not surprised, not even dismissive, just mildly entertained, like I was an unexpected variable in an equation he had already solved. He leaned back slightly, still watching me. So they did? He didn't sound convinced. He didn't even sound particularly interested. And somehow, that made it worse. The gallery thinks Duval might retaliate, I said, keeping my voice steady. They're worried about optics. Alexander exhaled a slow breath, shaking his head as if the whole thing was amusing. Of course they are. His fingers drummed lazily against the armrest, considering something. Then finally, he spoke. And instead of making a real move, they sent you to... what? His voice was slow, deliberate. Apologize? I stiffened. No. His gaze flickered over me, waiting for me to crack. Instead, I took a breath, to make sure there are no issues moving forward. He studied me for a moment longer before leaning forward slightly. Well, if they're so worried... His voice was softer now, more thoughtful. Maybe they should be. Something cold unfurled in my stomach. What? He tilted his head slightly, his smirk deepening but his tone too casual. If they're panicking, maybe they have a reason to. Maybe I should turn up the pressure, just to see what happens. My pulse spiked. That's not funny. He didn't blink. It's not a joke. There was something unsettling in how calmly he said it. Not a threat, not a bluff, just a fact. You seem smart, Sophia. His voice was smooth, unhurried. What do you think happens when people like Duval feel embarrassed? I swallowed. They push back. Alexander nodded slowly. Exactly. They retaliate. They make an example out of someone to remind people where they stand. A beat of silence. Then he smirked again. Your gallery panicked, but I didn't. Why do you think that is? I hesitated. Because you don't care. His smirk didn't fade. Wrong. There is a different game at play. I clenched my jaw. And what happens if you lose? His expression flickered, just slightly. Something passed behind his gaze, gone too quickly to name. You don't lose, he said simply. I exhaled sharply. That sounds like something only people who have never actually been on the losing side say. That smirk finally wavered, just for a second. Then, as if snapping back into place, his expression smoothed over again. Unreadable. He cleared his throat, shifting the conversation back into neutral ground. All right then, if Duval were to press the issue, what do you think the best course of action would be? I focused, letting instinct replace nerves. The gallery should control the narrative before he does, I said. If they let fear make the first move, they'll always be reacting instead of leading. His gaze sharpened slightly. And how do you get them to realize that? I hesitated. He let the silence stretch, then tilted his head. See, this is where you get stuck. I exhaled through my nose, because I don't have influence over what the gallery does. I can suggest, but Madame Vestra makes the final call. Alexander folded his hands together, nodding as if I had just figured something out. Exactly. I frowned. Exactly what? Power is about control, Sophia. If you want to fit in a world like this, you have to stop waiting for other people to make the final call for you. Influence doesn't come from title or status. It comes from your strategy. The words settled in my chest, heavy. Because he was right. I had spent my entire career playing a role, keeping my head down, making sure I was efficient, unnoticed, invisible. And for what? To be sent on damage control because my bosses thought I was an unstable variable if I stood my ground and because they wanted me to learn my lesson. Number I straightened, my voice steady. You're right. Alexander looked mildly surprised. That's it? No argument? No, I said, because I see your point. He gave a slow nod. Something new settled into the air between us. Not tension, not hostility. Something quieter. He exhaled a short breath, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. I knew that day that you're worth my time. And for the first time, I felt like I had actually won something. I picked up my bag, feeling lighter. Not because I had proved myself to him, but because I had proved something to myself. The conversation should have been over. I had said what I needed to say, held my ground, matched his pace. And for the first time since stepping into this office, I felt like I had left an impression. But then, I noticed the paintings. At first, they were just part of the room, blending into the calculated minimalist elegance of his office. But then my mind caught up, and the realization slammed into me so hard I stilled mid-movement. NoEye art. I knew those brushstrokes. Deep blues twisted with stark contrasts of black and white. Emotion woven into every line. Chaotic, yet deliberate. They were everywhere online. Anonymous. A mystery. No one had ever confirmed seeing an original. People debated if NoEye was even one person or a collective. But here, in Alexander Vailmont's office, they seemed real. I took an unconscious step forward. My voice came out softer than I intended, almost breathless. Are they real? I turned toward him, expecting an immediate answer. But Alexander just watched me, unmoving, completely unreadable. Then, his lips twitched into something too neutral. What do you think? It wasn't an answer. It wasn't a denial either. And that told me everything. My eyes flicked back to the paintings, heart pounding in my ears. No one had originals. No one had ever claimed to have seen one in person, but Alexander perhaps had them. For a moment, I didn't speak. I didn't know what to say, because suddenly, the carefully structured image I had of him, the cold, detached lawyer, the power player who never lost, the man who saw pressure as a tool rather than a burden, shifted. There was another side to him, a side that understood more than legal battles, a side that had interests in more profound questions. Slowly, I turned to face him fully. "How did you get them?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, that same unreadable expression still in place. "Why does it matter?" "It matters because..." I gestured toward the paintings, frustration lacing my voice. "No one even knows who NoEye is. No one has ever claimed to own an original. These shouldn't be here." He tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "Who says they are?" I narrowed my eyes. "So what? You're not going to tell me?" He gave a slow, almost lazy shrug. "I don't explain myself to people who haven't earned the answer." The arrogance of it should have irritated me, but instead, I felt something else. Curiosity, because this wasn't just about him having them. It was about the way he looked at them. People bought art for many reasons. For status, for investment, for aesthetics. But this was personal. I could see it in the way his gaze lingered, the way his posture changed ever so slightly. Like he understood these paintings, not just owned them. And I knew that feeling. I had spent my entire life surrounded by art, handling it, studying it, trying to understand the emotions that could be captured in color and form. These pieces weren't just hanging here for display. Slowly, I crossed my arms, studying him. You don't strike me as the kind of person who just happens to collect underground art. He exhaled a soft laugh, shaking his head. And you don't strike me as someone who actually thinks I just happened to collect them. A pause, a challenge. I was caught between intrigue and caution, trying to figure out if pushing him for answers would get me anywhere at all. Instead, I took a different approach. "What do you see when you look at them?" I asked. That got a reaction. It was subtle, but it was there. The brief pause before he answered. The slight shift of his fingers as he traced them along the desk's surface. For the first time in this conversation, he hesitated. Finally, his gaze flickered toward the paintings before returning to me. "I see what most want to ignore." His voice was softer now, less controlled. Something about the way he said it made my throat tighten. Because I understood. That's why people loved NoEye. That's why people obsessed over their work. I turned back to the paintings, studying them in the silence that followed. "They make you feel something," I murmured. "That's why you have them." Alexander didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. And suddenly, the distance between us felt smaller, because I wasn't talking to Alexander Vailmont, the lawyer who never lost. I was talking to someone who had looked at these paintings the same way I had. I swallowed. "You know what I think?" Alexander raised an eyebrow, curious. "Enlighten me." "I think..." I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I think you believe them." For the first time, he didn't have a response, not immediately. His smirk had faded slightly, his expression no longer one of calculated amusement. Instead, he just watched me, quiet, unmoving. The air between us shifted again, because this wasn't about me proving myself anymore. It wasn't about power plays or handling pressure or who was winning the conversation. This was something else. Something I hadn't expected to find in this office. A connection, not forced, not intentional, something real. I let out a small breath, stepping back. I should go. Alexander studied me for a moment, as if debating something. Then, finally, he nodded. As I turned toward the door, he spoke again. Sophia. I glanced back. His gaze flickered toward the paintings one last time before settling on me. Then, quietly, almost too quietly, he said, "Be careful what you look too closely at." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Because it wasn't a warning, it wasn't a dismissal, it was a reminder. For the first time since stepping into this office, I felt like I had seen something I wasn't supposed to, and the irony was that it felt great.